sequel 122 of the Church of Uganda at 150 years, a celebration. In the sequel, the return of Kabarega the Great in 1923. Why am I referring to him as the Great? Because he was the only ruler during the colonial times who never accepted to compromise with the colonialists. Others may have compromised at a later stage. He did not, until he was forced into exile. But now, in 1923, the return of Kabarega the Great. Why must we talk about his return in a celebration of a church sesquicentennial? The reason is, he became a victim of one of the commandments, the biblical commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Or if you prefer the New Testament, love your neighbor as you love thyself. He was a victim of that. And therefore, this history of our church, we remember his return to this great man. Newspapers at the time report that the king of Bunyoro, Anderea Duhaga, had pleaded with the protectorate government for years and years for the return of his father Kabarega, who was 84 in 1923. And so it would have been better to allow him die in his homeland as a private citizen. The governor of the Uganda Protectorate, Sir Geoffrey Francis Archer, in consultation with the colonial office in Great Britain, accepted the request. And the Bunyoro Kingdom and the Protectorate government agreed on who to send to the Seychelles to prepare the elderly former king of the Bunyoro. And the envoys were Yakobo Biomere Kajongolo and Prince Tito Gafabusa. They are the ones who went to the Seychelles to bring back the great king of the Bunyoro in exile. In the Seychelles, Kabarega lived with his son George Nyakana. But colonial documents I have seen at the National Archives of Uganda used to call him, or they simply call him, George Zezaya. Instead of George Nyakana, they write George Zezaya. Well, Kabarega in the Seychelles lived on an annuity paid by the British government, which exiled him. The journey at sea was successful, and the returning Omukama and his party members left Mombasa by train on the 10th of February 1923. Now, the train brought them to Nairobi, where they made a stopover, not for hours, but for days, if not weeks. But there, on arrival at the railway station, the Omukama was greeted enthusiastically by the African people. The colonialists were not amused. For if a foreign people could welcome the Kabarega the Great so warmly in a foreign land, what of his own people? The Kenyans had a special relationship with the great Omukama, having lived among them in Naivasha in 1899 on his way to Kismayo as a colonial prisoner. It appears that the Nairobi people had such a big admiration for the great king, and only us historians would dig up the secrets to know that when he was in Naivasha, he was a lucky man, because in one of the concubines in the area he got and never took with him. He left one pregnant, who therefore became the proud mother of a Kenyan, because, you know, in Kenyan society, many of the tribes are matrilineal. In other words, they follow the mother's side. So when the son was born, he really belonged to them. And that's why these Kenyans, we believe, are so happy on seeing the father of their son who was born in Naivasha amongst the Maasai people, although the girl who became a concubine of Kabarega was actually a Kikuyu girl. So, the protectorate government asked the party moving with the great Kabarega to stay on in Nairobi, as a new home was completed for him at a village called Mpumude, near Jinja in Busoga chiefdoms. I found a letter, reference number 2395, dated 11 October 1922, from the Protectorate Acting Chief Secretary to the Protectorate Provincial Commissioner, Eastern Province at Jinja. I found this letter at the National Archives of Uganda. And it said, and let me quote, "Sir, I have the honor to inform you that the British Secretary of State for Colonies has approved the return of Kabarega, ex-Omukama of Bunyoro, to reside at Kampala or Jinja. But the governor has decided that Kabarega should reside at Jinja. I should be glad if you would select a suitable site for his residence in the neighborhood of Jinja. A dispatch has been sent to the governor of the Seychelles to ascertain if Kabarega is willing to return under the above conditions." End of quote. Now, on the 15th of November 1922, I saw another letter, dated that date, where the acting provincial commissioner Eastern at Jinja replied in a letter to the chief secretary at Entebbe, advising him on a suitable site on a survey hill called Mpumude, or I think the Basoga call it Mpuimwire, which was no longer used by the survey department. It was outside the boundary of Jinja Township. The wattle and dab house in place could be pulled down and a suitable one erected to suit Kabarega's requirements. Indeed, the new house had a sitting room and 4 chambers of rooms surrounded by an open veranda. Meanwhile, the acting chief secretary had written to the Protectorate Provincial Commissioner, Masindi, on the 21st of October 1922, a letter which I have also seen at the National Archives of Uganda, and it reads, and I quote, "I should be glad if you would inform me whether, in your opinion, any regulations should be made with a view to restrict intercourse between Kabarega and the Banyoro. For instance, you might wish it to be arranged that no Banyoro should visit Kabarega without a written permit from yourself, presented to the Provincial Commissioner East at Jinja." And so, what happened next? The governor, Sir Geoffrey Fisher, accompanied by his wife, decided to test the waters in Bunyoro by embarking on a tour of northern Uganda, starting with Bunyoro. Now, finally, Kabarega left Nairobi to Kisumu, and by train, and by steamer from Kisumu to Jinja. Kabarega, the Great, who I prefer to call Akana Kaburega, arrived at Mpumude near Jinja on the 28th of February 1923, where the British Protectorate government announced that his journey would end for the moment. The Uganda Weekly Herald, dated 9th March 1923, volume 18, number 554, on page 7, which I've read at the National Archives of Uganda, confirmed the return of ex-Akana Kaburega and described him a proud figure, powerful, inspiring, great, and truly legal leader of men during his reign in the 1800s. The paper went on to comment, and I'll quote, "It is rather harsh treatment that has been meted out to Kabarega for having fought a great fight as a straightforward enemy. It must be a bitter disappointment to the old man to have returned only so far. Old friends came over to Jinja, and others came to see the one they had heard so much about, but whom they had never seen before, to catch a continual glimpse of the sights and scenes for which he has returned, to live as it were a wanderer on the fringe of a fair country into which he may not go." Why? Because Sir Geoffrey, in his address to the Bunyoro Parliament called Rukutaro on the 17th of March 1923, the governor told them, and I quote, these are in the archives of the Uganda National Archives, and I quote, he said, "Kabarega has been very severely punished for his wrongdoing, but now the government of Great Britain would forgive him and allow him to return to his people, but he would in no way be allowed to interfere in the prestige of the present Bunyoro Omukama. He would merely be in the position of a released prisoner who was allowed to return and live privately among his people." In reply, King Duhaga thanked the governor and told him that the Bunyoro people would always remember him as the one who brought back Kabarega to Bunyoro. But did he? We shall see in the sequels that will follow. No sooner had the governor's visit to Bunyoro ended than an interpretation developed to the effect that by tradition, Kabarega was still the Omukama and he would return to Bunyoro as such, for the people had simply hoodwinked the authorities in thinking otherwise. Brethren, as we wait for the next sequel to find out what happened, may the good Lord bless us all.